The emperor possessed among his suite the most accomplished confiseur in the world. Monsieur Perron daily supplied his table with the most elaborate and really sometimes the most elegant designs in patisserie, spun sugar in triumphal arches, and amber palaces glittering with prismatic tints. They looked as if they had been built for the Queen of the Fairies. After Her Majesty's own designs, Napoleon often sent us in some of the prettiest of these architectural delicacies, and I shall always continue to think of the bonbons from the atelier of Monsieur Piron, more exquisite than anything I ever tasted. But I suppose I must grant with a sigh that early youth threw its couleur de rose tints over Piron's bonbons, as well as the more intellectual joys of that happy period. The emperor sometimes added sugared words to make these things still sweeter. On New Year's Day, a deputation consisting of the son of General Bertrand, Henri, and Tristan, Madame Montsont's little boy, arrived with a selection of bonbons for us, and Napoleon observed that he had sent his Cupidons to the Graces. The bonbons were placed in crystal baskets covered with white satin napkins on Sevres plates. The plates I kept till lately, when I presented them to Lady Burdett, who had shown my mother and myself many very kind attentions, and they were some of the last presents I possessed of Napoleon's many little gifts to me, with the exception of a lock of his hair, which I still retain, and which might be mistaken for the hair of an infant, from its extreme softness and silkiness. Napoleon delighted in sending these little presents to ladies, and was generally courteous and attentive in his demeanor towards them. He always gave me the impression of being fond of lady society. And as Mr. O'Meara remarks, when alluding to my sister and myself dining one day with him, his conversation was the perfection of causerie and very entertaining. He was perhaps rather too fond of using direct compliments, but this was very pardonable in one of his rank and country. He remarked once that he had heard a great deal of the beauty and elegance of the governor's daughter, and asked me who I thought was the most beautiful woman in the island. I told him I thought Madame Bertrand superior beyond all comparison to anyone I had ever seen before. My father had been greatly struck with her majestic appearance on board the Northumberland, and I always thought everyone else sank into insignificance when she appeared, and yet her features were not regular, and she had no strict pretensions to beauty, but the expression of her face was very intellectual, and her bearing queen-like and dignified. Napoleon asked me if I did not consider Madame Montson pretty. I said no. He then desired Marchand to bring down a snuff box, on the lid of which was a miniature of Madame Montson. It certainly was like her, and very beautiful. He told me it was what she had been when young. He then recurred to Miss Blank, and said Gorgo spoke in raptures of her, and had sketched her portrait from memory. He produced the drawing and wished to know if I thought it a good likeness. I told him she was infinitely more lovely, and that it bore no trace of resemblance to her. I mentioned also that she was very clever and amiable. Napoleon said I was very enthusiastic in her favor, and had made him quite long to see her. Mesdames Montson and Bertrand and the rest of his suite often came to see him at the Briars, and remained there during the day. It was quite delightful to witness the deference and respect with which he was treated by them all. To them he was still the grand emperor. His every look was watched, and each wish anticipated, as if he had still been on the throne of Charlemagne. On one of these occasions, Madame Bertrand produced a miniature of the Empress Josephine, which he showed to Napoleon. He gazed at it with great emotion for a considerable time without speaking. At last, he exclaimed it was the most perfect likeness he had ever seen of her, and told Madame Bertrand he would keep it, which he did until his death. He has often looked at my mother for a length of time very earnestly, and then apologized, saying that she reminded him so much of Josephine. Her memory appeared to be idolized by him, and he was never weary of dwelling on her sweetness of disposition and the grace of her movements. He said she was the most truly feminine woman he had ever known. In speaking of the Empress, he used to describe her as very subject to nervous affections when in the least degree indisposed or anxious. He often said she was the most amiable, elegant, charming, and affable woman in the world, and in the language of his native isle asserted, era la dama la più graciosa di Francia. She was the goddess of the toilette. All fashions originated with her. Everything she appeared and seemed elegant, and moreover, she was so humane and was the best of women. Still, with all the veneration he felt for her, he could not bear that it should be supposed he exercised the sway over his public actions attributed to her, and observed, although the Bourbons in English allowed that I did some good, yet they generally qualify it by saying it was chiefly through the instrumentality of Josephine, when the fact was that she never interfered with politics. In alluding to his divorce, he observed, nothing would have induced him to listen to such a measure but political motives. No other reason could have persuaded him to separate himself from a wife whom he so tenderly loved. But he thanked God that she had died in time to prevent her witnessing his last misfortune. She was the greatest patroness of the fine arts that had been known in France for a series of years. She had frequently little disputes with Denon and even with herself. And she wanted to procure fine statues and pictures for her own gallery instead of the museum. But though I loved to attend to her whims, yet I always acted first to please the nation, and whenever I obtained a fine statue or valuable picture, I set it there for the people's benefit. Josephine was grace personified. Everything she did was marked with it. She never acted inelegantly during the whole time we lived together. Her toilette was perfection, and she resisted the inroads of time to all appearance by the exquisite taste of her parure.